So this presentation will, and as Sébastien has said, I'm familiar with these methods because I use them in my postdoctoral research on the political history of the High Middle Ages in the counties of Cambrai and Hainaut in northern France and in present-day Belgium. My postdoctoral research studied relationships between human actors. It was based primarily on textual sources and mainly on charters. Also, it uses the same methodological tools. The research I will present today is profoundly different because it does not deal with human actors and because the sources are not textual sources but archaeological artifacts. We will focus here on the numismatic sources of the Middle Ages and more precisely on the coins minted in the Belgian area between the 8th and the 15th century. Although they are preserved in a very large numbers, although they are well inventoried and convey a great deal of information, these sources can be exploited within the framework of a quantitative approach. But curiously, monetary sources have never been studied from the angle of network analysis. However, it seems interesting to use them in this way, as this approach sheds light on the question of monetary circulation in the Middle Ages and therefore sheds light on the economic history of the Middle Ages. My paper will be primarily methodological. Nevertheless, it will also attempt to shed new light on questions of economic history. We will try to determine whether some monetary workshops or mints supplied local markets or were more internationally oriented. We will also try to understand whether the coins minted in the Belgian area circulated together. The presentation will be organized in 3 parts. In the first part, I will briefly present what the monetary or numismatic sources are, what are their specificities, and how we have collected data about them. The next 2 parts will be organized around the presentation of 2 different networks. The first network will give us a better understanding of the geographical distribution of the corpus, while the second will give us a better idea of how the coins circulated together or not in the Middle Ages. So my paper will therefore focus on numismatics. Numismatics can be defined as the discipline that is primarily concerned with coins and other objects in forms of money or monetiform objects, such as tokens, ingots, and so on. Here, we will limit ourselves to exploring the case of coins, focusing on those from the medieval era. Medieval coins are often underexploited sources, even though they provide a wealth of information that can be used by historians, particularly from a quantitative point of view. In fact, in the medieval period, a coin is both an archaeological artifact, an object bearing iconography, and a textual document. If we examine, for instance, the Flemish and Hainaut coins minted, these Flemish and Hainaut coins minted in the High Middle Ages, we will find information about first iconography through the different images on the obverse and on the reverse of the coins, here a lion or a knight on his horse. We will find also textual information through the legends that indicate where the coins were minted and where the coins were produced, and under the authority of which prince. And finally, these sources also convey archaeological information, since we can measure the amount of silver or the amount of gold contained in the coins, but since we can also gather information about the archaeological context in which the coins were found. However, I would like to point out that coins were not the only means of payment in the Middle Ages. Other forms of payments also existed, such as payment with ingots of silver or of gold. It's not necessary here to discuss in detail the process of coin production in the medieval period. Let us simply state that coins were generally made from alloys containing a relatively high proportion of precious metal, such usually silver, more rarely gold. The metal was first melted down and then struck in mints by a specialized craftsman. It is during the stage of minting that all the iconographic and textual information were given to the coins during a process with hammering the coins, as you can see on the presentation. All these coins were only minted under the authority of powerful people, such as kings, princes, bishops, or sometimes such as cities. The practice of counterfeiting was severely repressed in the Middle Ages, as counterfeiting a coin was considered as an attack on regal prerogatives. Nevertheless, it should be noted that at the end of the Middle Ages, some princes of our region made a specialty of imitating foreign types of money by reducing very slightly the amount of silver contained in each of their coins. So with the same amount of silver, this allowed these princes to mint more coins. As a result, the consequence of all of that is that the bad imitation money from our region, and particularly the bad imitation from the counties of Namur and Luxembourg, started to flood the market. And as I said, this practice of counterfeiting was particularly present in the counties of Namur and Luxembourg, and the coin which appears on the first slide of my presentation is an imitation coin. It was a coin made in the workshop of Paul Vache in the Meuse Valley under the authority of the Count of Luxembourg, which imitated a coin from Great Britain, a coin from England, which is called a sterling. So how did these artifacts come down to us? In fact, it is relatively common to find ancient, medieval, or modern coins during excavations. Archaeologists generally distinguish between isolated finds and treasures or hoards. An isolated find is the discovery of a single coin in a specific location. Hoard or a treasure, on the other hand, designate a group of coins buried at the same time for reasons that are often difficult to determine. For instance, we can imagine that in the context of the 100 Years' War, a merchant decided to hide the coins he had in his possession at the bottom of his garden, but for undetermined reasons, he did not have the opportunity to retrieve his coins. And several centuries later, archaeologists discover this treasure or discover this hoard on the occasion of an excavation. So that is a treasure. And the important point behind these notions is that a treasure is a group of several coins, usually a few coins, but sometimes hundreds or thousands of coins. And all these coins may have been minted, may have been produced in different workshops and in different principalities. To take just two examples, the famous treasure trove of Fécamp in Normandy was discovered by chance in 1963, and this ore consisted of more than 8,000 coins from the end of the 10th century. The majority of these coins were produced in Normandy, but there were also many coins from workshops from Italy, from the Empire, from England, and in other words, these treasure mix coins of different origins. This is the same case with this treasure, with this hoard found in Dijon, so in Bourgogne, in 2019. This is a hoard of 15th century coins, which contains 10 gold coins, 24 silver coins, and most of these coins were not produced in Bourgogne, but they were produced in the Low Countries, in the former Low Countries, but also in northern Italy, in the Empire, and so on. So what is important with treasures or with hoard is that these treasures often mix coins of different origins. And in the context of this research, we have mostly data from treasures, mostly data from hoards. So fortunately for us, isolated treasures and finds have long been inventoried. Each year, in almost each European country, specialized journals publish a list of finds made during the previous year. In the early 2010s, the Flemish historian Aimé Hack had the excellent idea of publishing a survey of all the finds of medieval Belgian coins since the 19th century. In his book, the author reports first principality by principality, then workshop by workshop, all the monetary finds described in specialized journals since the 19th century. To give just one example, it can be determined from this book that the coins minted at the Namur workshop were found in several treasuries, in several hoards, in Great Britain, in Scandinavia, in France, in present-day Belgium. So in short, the inventory of Hack provides a lot of information, a lot of important information about the circulation of money in the Middle Ages, or about the circulation of Belgian money, if we can say that, during the Middle Ages, from the 8th century until the end of the 15th century. And as you have probably guessed, this inventory is the main basis of our work. During the last summer, Sébastien and I have scanned, have used OCR and transformed this inventory into data tables. We also completed the data provided by Hack by entering the GPS coordinate for each workshop and each treasure. As a consequence, the data tables provide information on the prints provide a lot of information, a lot of different information, and we will only use a part of them today. But these data tables will give us information about the prints under whose authority the coins were minted, about the workshop of their origin, about the types of coins, denarius, sterling, and so on, about the dates of issue of these coins, about the places of discovery, about the number of coins which were discovered, and so on and so on. So these tables contain a lot of information of the different kinds, and as we will see, these tables contain also several thousand lines, give us information about several thousand coins, about several thousand coins which were discovered in hoards. But you should ask what can be done with this data. These data offer many possibilities for quantitative analysis. Here, we will look at them from the perspective of network analysis. But other forms of exploitation would also be possible, but we will not explore them in details today. The data, for instance, could be used through the use of cartographic tools, locating the treasures according to the GPS coordinates of the places of discovery. This is what we did, for instance, with the coins minted here in the workshop from Belgium, from present-day Belgium, and we see that the coins minted in this workshop were discovered in England, in present-day Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Scandinavia, and so on. This form of data exploitation will be presented in a few months during a workshop that Sébastien and I will organize at the Université Libre de Brussels during the spring. Nevertheless, for this presentation, I have chosen to study the data through network analysis tools. In the following graphs, first graphs of this part of the presentation, the network can be described as bipartite. That is to say that the nodes, that the vertices, the circle, correspond to two categories. On the one hand, the workshops, the mint, will be represented in red. The red circles are the workshops, and on the other hand, the smaller circle in different colors will represent the places of discovery. And these small circles, these nodes, will be colored according to the geographical zones in which the coins were discovered. So Scandinavia is in yellow, Great Britain will be in blue, the former Low Countries at the center will be in orange, and so on. We will mainly explore, and I will explain the different colors in a few minutes. All the links are oriented, so they go from the workshop to the place of discovery, and the place, the whole graph concerning the whole Middle Ages is particularly impressive, since it counts more than 8,000 links, more than 8,000 edges for approximately 1,500 nodes, 1,500 vertices. In this graph, in the chosen visualization of the data brings the strongly connected nodes closer together, while it distances the loosely connected nodes from each other. So when the circles are close to each other, that is to say that these nodes are really connected, while when they are far from each other, these nodes are less or not connected. As you can say, the overall graph, the general graph, is particularly complex to read. It seems difficult to exploit this graph as such. It is therefore important to filter the graph to improve its readability. A very simple way of filtering the graph and analyzing the results is to focus on the production of each individual prince or of each individual king. I've done it for 3 different princes or kings. The first one is Charles the Bold, which was king of Western Francia between 843 and 877. The second one, the second example, is John I, Duke of Brabant, from 1267 to 1294. And the last one is William the Rich, William I, Count of Namur, from 1337 to 1391. These graphs are a very simple way of representing the monetary production of a king or of a prince. In the graph showing the coinage of John I of Brabant, for instance, the 3 main workshops in his service are those of Brussels, Maastricht, and Leuven, while the other workshops are of secondary importance. And as you could see, some treasures contain coins from different workshops. For instance, between Brussels and Maastricht, we have 6 circles, and these nodes represent treasures in which we find coins made in Brussels and coins made in Maastricht. So some treasures contain coins from different workshops. The colors used to represent the treasures are interesting as they make it possible to quickly visualize the differences between the production. For instance, it can be seen that coins produced in Brussels and Leuven were mostly found in treasuries from the former Low Countries, so in orange, whereas coins made in Maastricht here, made in Maastricht, were almost exclusively found in England, as if the Maastricht workshop mainly minted for export. In this respect, it would be very interesting to compare in series the production of prints of the same period in order to better understand whether their coins served to supply local markets or whether they were used on a larger, on a bigger scale. And this is almost the same remark about the networks of William I of Namur. However, the collected data can also be visualized in slightly more complex form. As I mentioned, the nodes representing the treasures have been colored according to the geographical area in which the treasures were found. However, when we look at the general graph, a geographical logic seems to emerge. Some areas are more linked with to workshop from specific region. A more detailed exploration of the graph will confirm this impression. Let us look first to Eastern Europe. In fact, the coins of these found in Eastern Europe, the treasures found in Eastern Europe, appear in the lower left-hand part of the graph. This is another way, another representation which highlight the treasures from Eastern Europe. And these treasures here are represented in pale orange. As I said, the coins found in this geographical area are concentrated in the lower left-hand part of the graph. The monetary treasures from which these coins originate are only linked to a limited number of workshops. And these workshops are the workshops of Visé, Dinan, Namur, Brussels, and so on. This graph is not really easy to read, but we can represent this data in another graph, in a circular graph, which allow us to better visualize which workshops are best represented in the treasures discovered in Eastern Europe. And when we do that, it appears that the workshops in the Meuse Valley, such as Namur, Maastricht, Liège, and Dinan, are the main workshops connected with Eastern Europe. This observation is interesting, especially as the medievalist André Joris has shown in the 1970s that merchants from the Meuse Valley were present at the fairs and markets of the Hanseatic League from the 12th and 13th centuries. An examination of the data relating to Scandinavia, so the data in yellow on the general graph, an examination of the data relating to Scandinavia reveals more or less the same picture. Roughly, the same workshops are very well represented in the discoveries made in Scandinavia. This is also the workshops of Namur, of Dinan, of Maastricht, but also mainly workshops from the Meuse Valley, but also Brussels, which is obviously not located in the Meuse Valley. The logic is different when we consider the case of monetary treasures discovered in other geographical areas, such as Great Britain. These treasures appear mainly on the right-hand side of the graphs and are partly linked with other workshops. While several previously workshops, such as Namur and Maastricht, are still well represented, new workshops are more linked with United Kingdom, such as Poilvache, we have talked a few minutes ago, such as Alost, such as also as Hasselt or Luxembourg. So England seems to be in relationships, seems to be connected to different workshops from the Low Countries. And the case is also very different for the for the treasures, for the hoards discovered in the former Low Countries, since these hoards, which are represented, which are colored in orange, are mainly at the center of the graph. They are therefore linked, connected to almost all workshops, regardless of the principality in which they are located. And the circular graph shows once again that other workshops are best represented in the treasures from the former Low Countries. And these new workshops are Ghent, Leuven, and Bruges, for instance. So the analysis we have just carried out allows us to use network analysis to highlight the geographical distribution of coins. The coins found in Eastern Europe or in Scandinavia seem to have been produced rather from workshops located along the Meuse, while the coins found in England came mainly from the Meuse Valley, but also from Flemish and Luxembourg workshop. Of course, it will be very useful to complete this approach with cartographic tools, by using maps such as I've presented a few minutes ago. Another way to use the data, the monetary data, is to produce a different kind of graphs. In the following graphs and tables, we will try to understand how coins from different workshops circulated together in the Middle Ages. This will allow us to identify trends in the monetary circulation. These trends would show, for instance, that coins minted in Luxembourg circulated more often with coins minted in Namur or in Liège, rather than with coins minted in Brabant or in Flanders, for instance. To show these trends, it is necessary to try to understand how the coins circulated together. It is necessary to use the data in another way. In the following graph, we have considered that the nodes are the monetary workshops, while the links show the fact, or describe the fact, that two coins from two different workshops were discovered in the same monetary treasure. For instance, the link here, there is a link between the workshop of Ypres and Ghent, because in a treasure, in a hoard, we have found coins from Ypres and from Ghent. What makes the links between the nodes is the fact that a coin of these two workshops were found together in a treasure. So, for instance, the hoard discovered in Skipton Bridge in England in 1949 contained both a sterling of John the Blind, Duke of Luxembourg, and a sterling of John the Blind made in the workshop of Poilvache, and it also contained another coin made in the workshop of Namur, and so we considered that there was a link between the workshop of Namur and the workshop of Paul Vache, because coins from these two workshops were found in the same hoard. It's not stated, and I do not say that these coins circulated together since their production, but at least they were mixed, they were circulated together at some points. And here in these graphs, the colors indicate the principality in which these workshops were located at the end of the Middle Ages. The workshops, the nodes in red are the workshops from the Principality of Liège. The workshops in blue are the workshops from the county of Namur. Yellow is for Flanders, green for Luxembourg, and turquoise for Brabant, and orange for Hainaut. And the other principalities are all in gray. In total, in sum, the global graph, the graph has 111 nodes and more than 2,000 links. The size of the nodes varies according to their degrees. So the size of the nodes varies according to the number of links, to the number of edges that a workshop has with other workshop. So Namur, for instance, has a lot of links or a lot of relations with a lot of different workshops. So the circle is bigger than the workshop of Bouvignes, for instance, which has only a few relations with other workshops. So, in other words, coins minted, coins produced in the big workshops of Namur, Bruges, Brussels, and Maastricht, for instance, are regularly found together with coins from other workshops in the monetary treasuries. And as we can see, the overall graph is, which includes all the data, is also very difficult to read at first glance, as nothing really seems to stand out. Nevertheless, it's almost possible to possible to identify the few most important workshops, which are those at the center of the graphs, but that's not particularly interesting in itself. It's probably more interesting to divide the overall graph into three subgraphs. Three subgraphs which corresponds to the three main periods of the Middle Ages. First, early Middle Ages, which here runs from the 8th century to the end of the 11th century. Second, High Middle Ages, corresponding to the 12th and 13th century. And finally, a late Middle Ages, corresponding to the 14th and 15th century. And in these three subgraphs, some trends could be identified. For instance, in the early Middle Ages, we note the presence of a very coherent group in the middle of the graph, which corresponds to workshops which were strongly connected, strongly linked to each other. Most of the nodes in this coherent group, in this coherent central group, correspond to workshops located in the Meuse Valley, such as Namur, Huy, Maastricht, and Dinan. The graph thus highlights the fact that coins produced in the Meuse Valley, or as Félix Rousseau has said, in the Pays Mosan, the coins produced in the Meuse Valley regularly circulated together in the early Middle Ages. Other important workshops, such as Valenciennes or Leuven, could also be observed, but they are located on the fringe of the network and are probably less connected to this central core. For the next period, the 12th and the 13th century, for the High Middle Ages, the most striking aspect is the large predominance of Flemish workshops, here in yellow. These Flemish workshops seems to be very closely linked to each other. And this is also the case, but we will see that this is also the case for the workshops of the Meuse Valley, which are mainly the workshops in red and the workshop of Namur. But we will see that in a few minutes. And with the late Middle Ages, the graph is more complex, with the appearance of a greater number of workshops. And in particular, we note the appearance of the Luxembourg workshops, which are the workshops in green. And all these workshops in green, such as Luxembourg, Marchand-Famenne, or Poil-Vache, for instance, were very discreet, did not appear until before the late Middle Ages. But these trends are even more visible when statistical analysis are used rather than graphic representation. It was said, Sébastien has said in the introduction, that networks were mathematical tools, and networks are not only graphical representations, they are also statistical tools, they are also statistical calculation, they are also mathematics, and we can use these statistical tools, we can use mathematics to identify the main trends of the network. In this case, the most interesting element, the most interesting tool is probably the density calculation. These metrics, whose results are normalized between 0 and 1, allow us to determine how dense the network is. That is to say, how well connected to each other the nodes are. Thus, a very dense network will be a network in which the nodes are all or almost all connected to each other, whereas a network with low density will be a network in which the nodes have almost no relationships with each other. So, and this metric is between 0 and 1, and the closer the metric is to 0, the lower is the density, and the closer the metric is to 1, the higher is the density. And here, this metric is particularly interesting in our case, as it will allow us to determine which workshops coins circulate most often with the other workshop coins. It's a metric that will help to determine which principalities coins circulated most often together, and to understand how this circulation will evolve over time. But here, rather than a graph, we will have a table of numbers. The first table, the most simple table, shows in figures what we have already seen in the graph. In the early Middle Ages, the density is 0.035, while it is 0.231 in the High Middle Ages and 0.2121 in the Late Middle Ages. In themselves, the absolute values are not really important. It is more interesting to compare them with each other to see that the High Middle Ages correspond to a period in which coins tend to circulate more together than in the preceding or in the following periods. And if we take the graph, it appears clearly that in the High Middle Ages, a lot of workshops were connected to each other. This is a phenomenon that's obviously deserves an explanation, but I'm unfortunately not yet able to explain the phenomenon. It is clear that the influence of Flemish workshop plays a role in the density of the High Middle Ages, but I cannot explain the phenomenon in details for the moment. But the phenomenon is very clear. And if we examine the data principalities by principalities, we will confirm this impression. The following table shows the evolution of the density for each of the principalities according to the different periods considered. In particular, it can be seen that the density is much higher in the county of Flanders in the High Middle Ages than in the other principalities, except for the principality of Liège. You see the density of Flanders in the High Middle Ages. Here, the density of Liège in the High Middle Ages, which are far more important than the density of the county of Namur, for instance. The evolution is nevertheless interesting. While the density was high for Flanders and Liège in the High Middle Ages, it decreases in the Late Middle Ages, particularly for Flanders, which it was almost divided by 10. For the other principalities, such as Namur and Brabant, the opposite is true. The density increases considerably in the Late Middle Ages. In other words, coins minted in Namur or in Luxembourg started to circulate more often with coins of the other principalities from the 14th century onwards. These phenomena are not easily to explain, but the trends are very clear. As the project and the exploration, the use of the data are still in their infancy, we can only formulate hypotheses to try to explain these phenomena. In my opinion, the increase in density in the county of Namur and in the Duchy of Luxembourg is probably due to the monetary policies developed in these principalities. With the important production of imitation coins in the Late Middle Ages in these two principalities, these imitation coins copied the great monetary types in vogue at that time, and particularly English types of money. It is known that these imitation coins of low quality were produced in large numbers and circulated massively, mixed with good foreign coins. This could explain why the density, but also the degree of centrality of the Namur and Luxembourg workshop increased during the Middle Ages. But I do not understand the reasons of the decrease in the density of Flanders and Liège. This is a topic I will have to explore in the next few months. And in addition, but I do not got into this. This data, all these data, allow us to explore two other aspects of the network. First, we can examine the density of principalities by pairs, in pairs. It is possible, and when we do that, it is possible to determine a form of a kind of homophily, that is to say, to determine which coins from two different principalities circulated together. And here I will limit myself to the case of Flanders in the 13th and 14th centuries, which shows that Flemish coins circulated slightly more often with the coins of Hainaut, and you can see that the density is higher with the coins of Hainaut than with the coins of Luxembourg, for instance. And we could do that for all the principalities, and we could examine all the principalities in pairs. Another form of representation of the data is the circular form of representation, and by changing the representation to a circular one, it is very easy to see which coins of which workshops circulate with which other workshop. I will limit myself here to show you the case of which workshop is very closely linked to other workshops, and more particularly with the workshops of Dinan, Namur, Maastricht, Bruges, and Brussels, as shown by the thickness of the links. This exploratory character of the graphics can be very useful when working in a more qualitative way, but it's not a very complex representation. It could be useful to use them, but it's not a tool as useful as the other graphs. So in conclusion, the sole purpose of this study was to present a first approach to a subject that seemed very promising. Although they have curiously never been exploited in this respect, monetary data are particularly well suited to a reticular approach. Much of the information that these coins provide about the authority under which they were issued, the places of their discovery, about the workshop in which they were produced, and so on, all these data can be cross-referenced with each other to provide a better understanding of medieval economic history. Although no solid conclusion can be drawn for the moment, the presentation showed the value of network analysis in the study of archaeological objects. By using different types of graphic representation or different statistical analysis tools, we have identified some basic trends in the distribution of coinage in our region. We have found that some workshops seem to be more concerned with local supply, while coins minted in other workshops are more likely to be exported. It is even possible to go further and to identify trends in this respect. For example, the workshops along the Meuse, the workshop in Huy, in Dinan, in Namur, seem to be strongly linked to Scandinavia and to Eastern Europe, while the Flemish workshops were more linked to England. We have emphasized the extent to which coins minted in workshops tended to circulate together, and this was particularly striking in the case of Flanders and Liège in the High Middle Ages. This presentation is only a first exploration of the data, but obviously much work remains to be done. It will be necessary to check that the data are not affected by gaps or bias by verifying that EMEAC did not omit some treasures in his survey. It would probably also be possible to complete the work of AC by integrating the discoveries made over the last 10 years, as well as those mentioned in digital tools such as the Portable Antiquities Scheme database, which records archaeological discoveries made in England. It is also possible to supplement these initial approaches with other forms of data representation, particularly through the use of maps. In short, the topic is very rich, and I hope that the work that Sébastien and I will be doing over the next few months will enable us to identify innovative perspectives, innovative trends in medieval economic history. We are obviously interested in all your comments, both on the methodology and on the results obtained, and I thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Nicolas, for this very pedagogical presentation. I don't really have questions, of course, because I know the project rather well, but I have a remark. I'm particularly glad that you put the focus. I think it's very interesting to see that from the same data sets, you have presented two different definitions of networks, and those two different networks, those two different families of networks, let's say, really offer different views and different possibilities of analysis of the same data. And so it really puts the emphasis on the modeling choice. What am I studying and how am I modeling that phenomenon that I want to study? And I think that it's one of the important lessons of methodological discussion about network analysis. So thank you a lot again for your talk. Are there questions for Nicolas? Do not hesitate to put your mic on. And yeah, Tan?
Yes, I would take this chance to first say that I'm really fascinated by the project because I always find it's interesting to look at graphs, and because it gives such a straightforward visual perception of the problem that is underneath the surface. And you can do so many different things. And I strongly echo on what Sebastian just mentioned, which was the point that I wanted to say as well, because you just presented so many different ways of looking at the same data. So you plot the graph, but then it can be investigated from different perspectives. Sometimes you bring in the time consideration as well, so that's yet another dimension, and look at different period and consider density and so on and so forth. But my question actually links to something that has to be done before all these nice things can be performed. That is the collection of the data, because that is something that normally people will not pay much attention to, but actually I think for researchers that is something that is very important, because that's the foundation that lays the ground, because nobody is going to give you all the data. And then you can just start to plot figures and plot graphs and just look into the thing. So I'm very interested in knowing at the very beginning of the presentation, you showed this sample Excel sheet where you have the data entered. So where those coins are being recovered and where, like, what are the means of the coins. So my question is, I think you briefly mentioned that you and Sebastian spent the summer scanning some of those coins. So my question was, so what was the process like to prepare this whole data sets, and where do you retrieve all those metadata about where those coins are being fabricated and where they are being recovered?
So I can share my presentation again. It would be more simple. Okay. So the data. So as I said, each year the hoards, the treasure which are found are described in a specialized publication, in specialized journals, and at the beginning of the 2010s, this historian made a survey, and he made a compilation of all the data that were published in journals. And the main basis of our work is, for the moment, but we will have to complete this data. The main basis of our work is this book published in 2012, I think. And what we have made, we took this book, we scanned all the book, and then, but there Sebastian will probably explain more in details than me. We converted all the data in the book in a data table by using tools that Sebastian knows very well, and it's this table that we use in our network. So our main information are this book for the moment, but we know that treasure were discovered. A lot of treasure were discovered since 2012, and we know that we have to complete the information AC gave. We will have to use some other database, such as the portable antiquity scheme I evoked at the end of my presentation, which give a list of all the discoveries in England, and this will add a lot of data. And the data tables only give a small part of the data which are in our table, but we use them. They are structured usually by workshop, by the Mint, and I think this is the graph, the table for the first graph, for the graphs with the workshops and the treasures. And in the first here we have in the first row the workshop, then the target is the ore, the place of discovery, and then we give a lot of information about the discovery, about which workshop and which this coin was made under the authority of which lord, could we date the coin, which type of coin, and so on. And then we have the second table with the attributes of the data, and here the ID of the data, but also the coordinates, the GPS coordinates, and all this information. But Sebastian could give some information about the way it transformed the book into table, maybe.
Yeah, so we used NoCR software to OCRize the book, and then using we used R scripts to put all the information in tables. But okay, not something very. Generally, when we try to extract information for the use of network analysis, for example, when analyzing, I don't know, a corpus of letters or something, you have to somehow put some strategy into what you try to do. For example, you use entity name recognition methods in order to extract from letters names of individuals that are mentioned. Here, that's not the case. Here, the point is just to extract the data, and I would say that that's just the first step, of course, because when we will have to somehow complete the data, to complete the analysis, we will, I guess, Nicolas, if you're not, if you do not agree with me, don't hesitate to tell it. We will have to use the catalog numbers of the different coins in order to, for example, get all the all the other kind of information that we know from the coin about the coins, like for example, I don't know, the weight and the size and so on. But yeah, in this case, it's just extraction from the book, which, okay, does not really come in a very handy form, alas. But I would have preferred a table, I would say, but yeah, of course, it can be done, and that's the most important thing. So we have a question about the software you used, Nicolas.
The software we used for the table, obviously, is a software like Excel, but for the networks we use Gephi, which is a software which is easy to take into hands, easy to use. A software which produce good representation, good graphical representation, which also could produce good calculation, good statistical analysis of the network. So this is a very good software, but here the problem is that the data are very numerous. We have 1,000 lines of Gephi had some difficulties to manage with all this data, but it's a very good software for a network analysis when we start to do that kind of things. But there are a lot of other softwares. There are softwares which are called UCNet, Payek, or NodeGoat. I think they are also good softwares, but the other advantage is that it runs on Windows, on Mac, and on Linux. So we can use it on all the types of computers.
Do you know if the other pieces of software that you mentioned would manage, I would say, a large data set such as this one, maybe better than Gephi? Because you mentioned some problem. Do you know if UCNet or Payek or something else would manage that better?
Yeah, I think that Payek is a very good software. It will manage the data easily, but the problem with Payek is probably it's a very old software produced in Eastern Europe in the middle of the 19th. So it's not the graphs are less beautiful than in GEFI. But I know that PAYEC is a very good tool for statistical analysis. For instance, PAYEC has very good tools that are not present in GEFI.
Of course, there is also the possibility to use any script language. For example, R with the iGraph package. It's very well suited for network analysis. The point is that, you know, if you really want to make your hands dirty, I would say, with the data from the with the network data, you really should play with. That's my opinion, at least. You really should play with a graphical user interface, because that's doing that kind of play that you can that you will be able to see some trend, to see some question to ask your data, and maybe in a second time then you implement those questions in a more systematic way, for example in RIgraph or in Python or in whatever you want. But yeah, for just looking at the data, asking yourself what kind of questions will I ask to the data, and that's a bit circular, but I really think that a graphical interface is a very good thing to do. You can drag and drop the nodes, apply different spatialization algorithms in GEFI and so on, and that's a good thing to make, I would say, a first layer of analysis before jumping to scripting.
Yeah. And I cannot remember which software you used to produce the map. Was it GEFI or was it?
No, this comes from R. This comes from R, yeah.
But I know that there is a plugin with GEFI for the maps that are.
So we have some remarks and a question from Anna. Anna, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read your question?
Well, it's right there. It's just, yes, following on from Tan's question about creating the data set. You know, are you planning, or have you started putting the prepared data set in an openly accessible repo, you know, meeting FAIR standards and all that? Is that something that's part of the project?
Yes, I think we will do that. We have not, for the moment, the data are not really not dirty, but we have,
or at least a methodology of it, because I know it's similar in my projects as well. There are copyright and depending who you're working with, that sort of considerations to be had. But it, you know, as we work more with data,
yeah,
the publications that researchers rely on from each other is no longer just the final outcome in text, but it's also how did you do it, what did you do, you know, that would be very invaluable, I feel.
Yes, I think so. Thank you for this remark. I think so. It will be very important to do that. For my postdoctoral research, for the networks I built during my postdoctoral research, I put the data and I explained how I made the data in a paper, but I put them on a GitHub repository, so other historians can use my data, and I think it's very important. And I think we will have to do that with this data also, because we have a lot of information, and it's sure that we will not exploit all this information. We are extensively. We will probably miss some question, and it's important that other historians and other archaeologists will have access to our data. So thank you.
Yeah, and I guess that if we do so, of course, for as you mentioned, Anna, for now, for copyright reason, we don't really know if we could publish that, but that's a question we will ask after to the publisher of the book. And of course, if we're going to publish those data, for example, on a GitHub or something, we would put a data paper. I would say a data paper with that explaining how we all the details of the pre-treatment and post-treatment steps that we have submitted the data to, because of course it's very important. Yeah. Are there other questions or remarks? Not really. Okay, then I want to thank our speaker again for this very nice talk, and thank all of you for being present and for this nice discussion after the talk. And Bear, I hope that you will also join the third series, the third session of our series. Tan, do you know the exact date?
I don't know it by heart, but perhaps we'll send out
early
emails
December,
later.
I think. Okay, let's say early December. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. No, so it's on the 7th of December. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So see you there, and take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.